What if the most famous faces in classic Hollywood were hiding things you were never meant to hear about? What if the smiles, the glamour, and the perfect premieres were covering up stories studios worked overtime to bury? Old Hollywood wasn't built on honesty, it was built on silence. And some secrets were so carefully controlled that even the stars themselves weren't allowed to speak. Stick around, because once you hear what was hidden, those old movies may never look the same again. Number 15. Shirley Temple is remembered as Hollywood's eternal ray of sunshine. Curly hair, bright smile, a symbol of hope during the hardest years of the Great Depression. But behind the scenes, her fame attracted attention that was anything but harmless. During a live performance in the 1930s, a deeply troubled woman made her way into the audience carrying a dangerous plan. She believed Shirley Temple had somehow taken something meant for her own child. The situation unfolded quietly and was stopped just moments before it could turn tragic. Studio officials moved fast. The story was buried. No headlines, no interviews, no public discussion. At the time, Hollywood could not afford fear around its most valuable child star, so the incident was erased. Shirley continued smiling on screen while adults around her made sure the public never knew how close things came to disaster. Years later, Temple would speak openly about the darker side of her early fame. She described how the industry treated children as products, not people. Her experience shattered the illusion that childhood stardom was safe or protected. The secret here isn't just the incident itself, it's how easily it was hidden, and how quickly Hollywood learned that silence was the most powerful tool it had. Number 14. Joan Crawford was known for strength. Sharp cheekbones, commanding presence, a face that defined an era. But what audiences never knew was how far she went to maintain that image. Early in her career, Crawford was told her face wasn't dramatic enough for close-ups. The solution suggested to her was extreme. She quietly had several back teeth removed to alter the shape of her jaw. No announcements, no interviews, just a permanent change made in private. At the time, studios treated appearance like a job requirement. Actors were told what to weigh, how to walk, how to speak. Crawford understood the rules. If you wanted longevity, you complied, and she did. The result worked. Her look became iconic. Her career soared, but the cost was never discussed publicly. Hollywood praised the result while pretending the sacrifice never happened. This secret matters because it shows how control worked in the studio system. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was subtle, a suggestion, a warning, a quiet decision made in fear of being replaced. Joan Crawford survived Hollywood by reshaping herself, literally, and that reality stayed hidden for decades. On number 13, Singing in the Rain from 1952 looks effortless, smiles, precision, pure joy. But behind the scenes, the experience was far from lighthearted. Debbie Reynolds was young and inexperienced when she was cast opposite Gene Kelly. She had talent, but she wasn't a trained dancer at his level. Instead of patience, she faced relentless pressure, long rehearsals, harsh criticism, little rest. Reynolds later described collapsing backstage, exhausted and overwhelmed. She was pushed to keep going because the show had to go on. Kelly demanded perfection, and the system backed him completely. None of this appeared on screen. The movie became one of the most beloved musicals ever made. Audiences laughed, critics praised it, and the hardship behind it disappeared from public memory. This secret isn't about one difficult personality. It's about how Hollywood rewarded results, not well-being. If the final product sparkled, the process didn't matter. The film became a symbol of happiness, but for those making it, the cost was real. And that contrast is one of old Hollywood's most uncomfortable truths. Number 12. George Reeves became a household name as Superman in the 1950s. For many viewers, he was the hero who defined television courage. Off-screen, his life was far more complicated. In 1959, Reeves was found gone under circumstances that immediately raised doubts. The official explanation was delivered quickly, but details didn't line up. Conflicting accounts, physical signs that confused investigators, and witnesses who changed their stories. Hollywood moved on fast. Studios didn't want mystery attached to a beloved hero. The case was closed. Public discussion faded. But questions never stopped. Friends, fans, and historians have debated the event for decades. Some point to career frustration, others to personal entanglements. No single explanation fully satisfies the evidence. What makes this one of Hollywood's biggest secrets isn't just the unanswered questions, it's how quickly the industry shut the door. No follow-ups, no re-examinations, just silence. Reeves became frozen in time as Superman, but the man behind the cape was never given clarity, and that unresolved ending still haunts Hollywood history. Number 11. Alfred Hitchcock was called the master of suspense. His films changed cinema forever. But behind the scenes, his behavior towards certain actresses revealed a darker side of creative control. Tippi Hedren rose to fame in The Birds in 1963. She had talent, presence, and instant recognition. But her working relationship with Hitchcock became increasingly uncomfortable. He monitored her closely, isolated her, limited her interactions. When Hedren resisted his control, her career stalled, roles vanished, opportunities dried up. In an era where directors held immense power, refusing them came at a price. For years, this story stayed quiet. Hitchcock was a legend. Questioning him was unthinkable. Only later did Hedren describe how the experience affected her personally and professionally. This secret exposes how authority operated in old Hollywood. Creativity came with conditions, and saying no could quietly end everything. Hitchcock's films remain celebrated, but the cost paid by those around him is now part of the story, too. Number 10. Lana Turner was the definition of classic glamour. Carefully styled, carefully photographed, carefully protected, until one night shattered that control completely. Turner became involved with a man whose presence brought constant tension into her life. Arguments were frequent. The atmosphere in her home grew unstable. Then one night, everything boiled over. A confrontation turned physical. And before the night was over, a life was lost inside Turner's own house. What followed was a media storm Hollywood had never seen. Reporters camped outside. Headlines ran wild. Every detail was dissected. The official ruling declared the incident justified, but whispers never stopped. Studios scrambled to protect Turner's image. Appearances were arranged, statements were rehearsed, the narrative was carefully managed, and remarkably, Turner's career survived. This secret endures because it showed the limits of Hollywood's control. Studios could hide habits, they could hide relationships, but they couldn't fully erase a night that shook the entire industry. Turner returned to the screen. The public applauded, but the shadow followed her forever. Proof that even in old Hollywood, some secrets were too big to disappear. Number 9. Montgomery Clift was admired for his sensitivity, his quiet intensity, his ability to convey emotion without raising his voice. But one night changed everything. After a dinner gathering in the mid-1950s, Clift was involved in a devastating car accident. The injuries were severe, recovery was slow, and the damage went far beyond the physical. His appearance changed. His confidence shifted. The man audiences knew seemed altered. Friends noticed it. Co-stars felt it. But the public was told very little. Studios downplayed the impact. Films continued, but Clift struggled to regain the control he once had. His performances remained powerful, yet something fragile had entered the frame. This secret isn't hidden because no one noticed. It's hidden because no one wanted to acknowledge how deeply it affected him. Hollywood preferred the myth of resilience over the reality of change. Clift continued working, but the accident marked a dividing line, before and the after was never truly addressed while he was alive. Number 8. Stan Laurel made audiences laugh for decades. His on-screen persona was gentle, confused, harmless. But behind closed doors, the story told by those closest to him was very different. During his marriage to Vera Shuvalova, allegations emerged that shocked people who only knew Laurel from the screen. She claimed his behavior changed drastically at home. Threatening language, unsettling actions, a side of him that felt completely disconnected from the man audiences adored. When the marriage ended, the accusations became public. But the industry did what it often did best. It looked away. Laurel's reputation remained largely intact. His legacy stayed focused on laughter. This secret matters because it highlights the distance between image and reality. Comedy doesn't guarantee kindness. Fame doesn't ensure stability. Laurel continued to be celebrated as half of one of cinema's greatest duos, and for years the darker stories faded into footnotes. Old Hollywood thrived on contrast, bright screens, dark corners, and sometimes the gap between the two was wider than anyone wanted to admit. Number 7. Joan Crawford ruled the screen with authority, strength, control. But years after her peak, a very different portrait emerged. Her daughter Christina published a memoir that painted Crawford as harsh, unpredictable, and deeply difficult at home. The book stunned Hollywood. Some supported the claims, others rejected them completely. What made this secret explode wasn't just the accusations, it was the reaction. Friends, co-stars, family members lined up on opposite sides. The industry fractured over whether to protect a legend or believe a child. Crawford herself was no longer alive to respond. Her image shifted overnight. Films once celebrated now felt complicated. Scenes took on new meaning. This secret endures because it forces a question Hollywood never likes to answer. Can greatness on screen excuse pain off screen? The truth may never be fully agreed upon, but once the story surfaced, it couldn't be put back, and Crawford's legacy became forever layered. On number 6, Charlie Chaplin changed cinema forever. His work crossed borders, his character became universal, but his personal life told a much more complicated story. Chaplin's marriages drew attention for reasons unrelated to romance: large age gaps, public discomfort, legal battles that spilled into headlines. Even by the standards of the time, many people felt uneasy. The scrutiny followed him for years. It affected his standing in America. Eventually, Chaplin left the country, settling elsewhere for the remainder of his life. Hollywood celebrated his genius while quietly distancing itself from the controversy. His films remained beloved. His personal choices became a source of debate. This secret isn't hidden, it's unresolved. How do you reconcile groundbreaking art with deeply uncomfortable realities? Chaplin remains a legend, but his story reminds us that fame doesn't freeze someone in time, and even icons leave behind questions that never fully fade. Number 5. Marilyn Monroe was marketed as effortless beauty, natural charm, pure confidence. But the woman behind the image carried a past Hollywood carefully avoided acknowledging. From an early age, Monroe experienced instability. She moved through foster homes, lacked consistent care, and learned quickly how fragile security could be. By the time she entered Hollywood, she had already learned how to perform survival. Studios built her into a symbol, but they discouraged any mention of her history. Vulnerability didn't sell, questions weren't welcome, interviews were guided, narratives were approved. Behind the scenes, Monroe worked relentlessly. She studied acting, took control of her career when she could. Yet the pressure to remain light, playful, and uncomplicated never eased. This secret matters because it reframes her story. Monroe wasn't fragile by nature, she was resilient by necessity. The system that celebrated her refused to make space for her complexity. Hollywood loved the image, it struggled with the human being, and that imbalance followed her to the very end of her career. Number 4. Marlon Brando revolutionized acting. His performances felt raw, alive, unpredictable, but off-screen his relationships were often turbulent. One of the most revealing accounts came from actress Rita Moreno. Their relationship was intense, consuming, and deeply painful for her. Moreno later spoke about how the emotional strain affected her sense of self and career confidence. At the time, Brando's genius excused almost everything. Behavior that would raise alarms today was minimized or ignored. Hollywood protected its brightest stars, even when others paid the price. Moreno survived. She rebuilt. She spoke openly later in life. But during the height of Brando's fame, her experience remained largely invisible. This secret exposes how talent functioned as armor in old Hollywood. The greater the star, the quieter the consequences for those around them. Brando's legacy remains monumental, but so does the reminder that brilliance doesn't exist in isolation. It shapes lives beyond the screen. Number 3. Judy Garland could sing like no one else. Her voice carried joy, longing, and heartbreak all at once, but her life behind the scenes was tightly managed from the time she was a child. Studios regulated her schedule relentlessly. Sleep, food, energy, everything was monitored. The goal was consistency. The cost was childhood. Garland learned early that compliance meant survival. Saying no wasn't an option, and asking for help wasn't encouraged. Audiences adored her. Hollywood applauded her, but very few questioned what it took to maintain that level of output year after year. This secret is now widely known, but it was hidden while it mattered most. Garland carried the weight quietly, and by the time the public understood, the damage was already done. Her talent was real, her struggle was real, and the system that shaped her never took responsibility while she needed it most. Number 2. Clark Gable was the ultimate leading man. Confident, powerful, untouchable. But one of the biggest secrets in Hollywood history followed him quietly for decades. Gable fathered a child with actress Loretta Young. Because he was married at the time, the pregnancy was hidden. Young disappeared from public view. The child was placed elsewhere before later being adopted back under controlled circumstances. The resemblance was undeniable. Hollywood insiders knew. The public was never told. The secret held because silence protected careers. Reputation mattered more than truth, and the studio system had the power to enforce both. Years later, the story emerged. Too late for honesty, too late for accountability. This remains one of old Hollywood's most carefully maintained deceptions, not because it was impossible to reveal, but because everyone involved knew exactly what silence preserved. Number 1. George Reeves became Superman for an entire generation. Strong, trustworthy, unshakable. But his final chapter remains one of Hollywood's most unsettling mysteries. When Reeves was found gone in 1959, explanations came quickly, too quickly. Details didn't align, accounts conflicted, physical evidence raised more questions than answers. Hollywood chose closure over clarity. The show ended, the case closed, the conversation stopped, but fans never let it go. Decades later, debates continue. Was it despair? Was it pressure? Was it something else entirely? What makes this secret endure isn't speculation, it's uncertainty, and the knowledge that the industry preferred a neat ending over a thorough one. Reeves remains frozen as a hero on screen. Off-screen, his story refuses to settle, and that unresolved silence is old Hollywood's most haunting secret of all. Old Hollywood promised magic, but behind the curtains, it ran on control, silence, and carefully managed truths. Some secrets stayed hidden for decades, others only surfaced when it was too late to change anything. Which one surprised you the most? And which do you think still hasn't been fully told? Share your thoughts, subscribe for more deep dives into cinema's past, and remember this: the brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadows tend to be.